So, are you 11 years old? Or are you just, are you new to miniature painting? Or, do you like miniatures? And you've seen all these cool miniatures that people have painted up, but you don't know how to get started. This is the video for you. This is also a video for my good friend Brad and his girlfriend's daughter, Presley. Hey, Presley. Who, at the time of this video, is 11, I think. And Presley and Brad, they recently got into painting miniatures. And they like painting miniatures, and they're brand new to this hobby. So I thought maybe I would share a little bit about how to paint your first miniatures if you're literally brand new, whether you're a kid or a grown-up kid. Because we know all grown-ups are kids in their heads. Greetings, good humans, and welcome to Tabletop Alchemy, where sometimes we paint up a miniature to show kids and adults who like the idea of painting miniatures how fun and easy it can be. And specifically, I want to show Brad and Presley two simple little tricks that can basically help them level up to the next stage and can also help any of you who are brand new to miniature painting just very easily level up to the next stage. Basically, this is a video I wish that I'd been able to see before I painted my very first miniature way back in 1992. I'm not old. You're old. Have a donut. We also thank our patrons for not calling me old and for supporting this endeavor in helping newbies level up their painting hobby. All right, so some ground rules for this operation today. Number one, I'm going to use only the equipment I think someone new to the hobby would be using, such as cheap synthetic brushes from Hobby Lobby or Michael's or wherever. Amazon, of course, will have all this stuff. I've got a couple here that are pretty old, but I actually end up just using mostly the yellow bristled one here. And number two, a paper towel for, wiping the brush on. I like to use the half sheet perforated sort of style, and I fold it in quarters to make a nice little rectangular pad to wipe the brushes on after I rinse them in the water cup, which, yes, number three, you'll want a cup of plain old tap water when you're painting. I use this 4-inch tall square glass vase I found in Michael's on sale one day because it's got a very heavy base, and because it's square, it's hard to tip over. And if anyone needs help not tipping stuff over on their hobby desk, it's me. I'm not old, I'm just clumsy. I've got this super cheap paint palette thing, that's number 5. I guess, that you can buy these things in 6-packs for a few bucks, or even cheaper. You could use a ceramic dinner plate if you wanted. You could use you don't want to use a paper plate. You could use a glass plate, a plastic plate. You could use a tile from the bathroom, or like I said, a ceramic dinner plate if your mom, won't catch you, and it'll clean up pretty well. It's ceramic. You can scrub paint off of there, no problem. And I'm going to paint up one of these plastic miniatures from Reaper, which are typically one of the cheapest ranges of miniatures out there that have decent detail, and they do make like hundreds of different figures, from monsters to heroes and everything in between. And I thought he was cool with his double axes and his beard. And I like Lord of the Rings like everyone else, and he's a good basic mini to start with. Now, let's get to painting, but whoa! Hold your horses there, Rambo. Let's slow down just a tick. Before you paint that miniature, you probably should put it on some kind of handle so that, you don't have to hold it like a Dorito-fingered crazy person while you're putting paint on it. It's hard to paint a mini when you're holding the actual mini, right? Because then you're always holding part of it that's going to have wet paint on it, and then you can't paint the parts that your fingers are on. I like to use these little fast food condiment cups because they're super cheap. You can buy sleeves of like 50 of these things for like, I don't know, $5 or $7 at Smart and Final, or of course on Amazon. And they work really well as handles, at least for me. I mean, lots of people use like wine bottle corks or little blocks of wood. I mean, really, you can use anything you want, that's about yay big and that you can hold comfortably and that you can stick a miniature on top of. Now, to put the miniature on the cup or whatever handle you're using, I use poster tack because it is reusable. And you can just reuse this stuff by, like, here's an old ball of poster tack that I've used on many, many miniatures. And you can just reuse this stuff by stretching it out and then wadding it up again and squishing it around. And I just squish some of it onto the cup, and then squish the miniature. It's kind of like a small minotaur. I squished the miniature onto the sticky tack. It's not going to fall off, you know, unless you have like a really big miniature or a metal miniature. But then, of course, you might want to use a bigger handle. Let's use our noggins, folks, right? We got these things up here, our thought cages. Got them for a reason. Anyway, if you have a big, heavy miniature, you just want a bigger handle. And in that case, you could, possibly super glue it to there and then you have to break it off later. Or you could use some hot glue and maybe cut it off. Whatever. We're not talking about big, heavy miniatures. We're talking about newbie level stuff, man, right? Where you're getting into it just at the beginning. You're going to paint a little miniature, an actual miniature, a miniature. I should make a line of miniatures or a line of figures that are called churs, and they're miniature churs. I have no idea what I'm saying. And I'm reading a teleprompter with a script on it. You'd never know. All right, one quick tip here about cleaning or rinsing a brush in your cup. Just roll the tip against the smooth wall of whatever glass or plastic cup you're using for water. This won't really damage the bristles, and when you dry it on the paper towel, always spin the brush as you drag it on the paper towel to help the bristles form into that nice, sharp, pointy tip. That's what we want for painting, right? Now, synthetic brushes will typically lose their pointy tips over time, and that's why they're cheap, but that's okay. One thing to not do with brushes like this, or any brushes, is to, in order to help keep the tips as long as possible, is to never let them rest in the rinse cup, like especially tip down where they're just sitting on the bristles, because that'll bend the tips for sure. And if you're totally new and you're wondering, like, what is the difference between synthetic brushes and non-synthetic brushes, there's a whole thing out there about natural hair brushes, which is actually what I do typically tend to use, but those are more expensive. The cheaper ones run in the realm of like $7 a brush or so, which, you can get a whole pack of these synthetic brushes for. They just tend to last a little longer and they paint a little nicer, but you don't need to worry about that. You can do just fine with these cheap synthetic brushes. They are totally cool to paint with. Okay, let's get to the thing, right? It's time to paint. Finally. Well, yeah, we're going to paint, and we are going to actually paint this next step, but it's not quite the painting you're probably thinking that you're getting ready to do. I'm going to show you something miniature painters do most of the time that you may not know about, and it's called priming. Now, most mini painters prime all of their miniatures, and I do too, but you don't actually have to do this step with plastic miniatures that are made of styrene, or even these bones miniatures, which are made of, I don't know what kind of plastic or resin that these things are made out of. I think they might be vinyl based, but I don't actually know. But you can apply paint directly to these if you want to. But if you have miniatures painted out of, say, resin, either 3D printed miniatures or poured resin, or if you have metal miniatures, you absolutely need to prime them, because regular miniature style paint, acrylic paint, is not going to stick to them real well. That is something you can look up how to do on YouTube. There are thousands of videos on priming miniatures. But if you just have like these bones figures or any kind of like injection molded miniatures that are, that come on little sprues that you cut off and stuff like that and glue them together with plastic glue, those you can paint, you can put acrylic paint directly on. Now, what I'm going to do that you can do as well is just put down a base coat of white paint. This is basically called priming the miniature. This will sort of seal up the miniature and give you a nice bright layer for your colors to stick to. Because as you notice, this Bones Reaper miniature I've got is kind of a medium to light gray color, and other miniatures that you have may be molded in different colored plastics. And so you might want a nice clean white canvas to paint on. Speaking of paint, let's talk about that for a quick minute. Now, Brad and Presley, I've seen photos of your minis. Awesome jobs, by the way. They are super cool. And I could be wrong about this, but it looked to me like the paint you're using might be glossy, which means it dries with a shiny, glossy finish. And to be honest, glossy paint is a little bit tougher to work with in a lot of cases, because glossy paint, it just ends up being a little bit tougher to work with than flat, matte colors. Now, most paint formulated and marketed for miniature painting dries with a matte or satin finish. Satin is sort of a halfway between matte and glossy. I think if you ever end up painting with some matte miniature paint, you will not only like the results, but you'll also really like working with that paint a little bit better. So while I have lots of different brands of miniature paint here in my hobby area, I'm going to use mostly this brand, Vallejo. And they make a ton of different colors. This is not sponsored by Vallejo. You can see these are from two different lines that they make, the model color line and the game color line. That's just marketing stuff. All the Vallejo paints are really good for mini painting. Vallejo is high quality, relatively affordable compared to other paint brands, and is usually readily available at most game type hobby stores or, you know, model hobby shop type stores. Not like Hobby Lobby, although sometimes they carry a few bottles of it, but specifically I'm talking about like tabletop game shops and model hobby shops. Now, of course, it's also available online. There are hundreds of colors that Vallejo makes, so it can be overwhelming to pick out a few to start with. But if you're gonna get a few, you know, to start with, just get some white, some black, one or two brown colors, like a dark and a lighter brown, a red, a green, a yellow, and a blue, you know, your primary colors. And if you can afford it, get a dark and light version of each of those primary colors, the reds, the greens, and the blues. You can always mix yellow with a little bit of white, brighten it, you know, to lighten it up a little bit, and it's fine. And you can mix other colors with those if you want. But like most people, when you stand in front of a rack of Vallejo colors or any of the miniature paint brands that some of these hobby stores will carry, you will be like, ooh, I like that crazy electric blue. And oh, I like that mucus green color. And you want to get a whole bunch, but you know, slow your roll. It can get a little pricey. Each one of these bottles of paints runs about $3 to $4. And these are on the cheaper end. So, you know, but they'll last you. They'll last you a really, really long time. So they're a good investment if you go with a decent quality paint range. All right. Now, mini paint will also have some metallic colors, of course, silvers and bronzes and golds and coppers and whatever. And this is an example of another brand that I believe is affordable, but it is pretty nice quality. And this is Army Painter. But specifically, the good quality stuff is the Army Painter War Paints Fanatics line. All right, so let's get back to this white base coat that we're priming our mini with. I put some white paint on the palette, and I'm going to just add a tiny bit of water just by dipping my brush in the rinse cup and adding it to the paint and mixing it up. Now, this little trick of putting a tiny bit of water into whatever color you're painting with will make the paint go on much smoother than without. And I'm talking just a tiny bit of water. Some paints, when they get old, will turn a little bit thick because their hydration is evaporating, but you can always just add tiny bits of water to bring them back to a nice painting consistency. So throughout this video, you may notice that every time I go to the palette with my brush to get a bit more paint, I'm actually dipping it just the tiniest bit into the rinse water first, and then getting a little bit of paint mixed into it to bring to the miniature. But here, I'm just slapping this white paint all over, trying not to miss any spots. And once you're done with this step, just let your miniature sit around for 10 minutes to fully dry that white paint. Now, if you've got a bunch of minis you want to paint, you can set them all up on the little painting handles that you've collected, you know, or whatever, and you can prime them up all at once. And by the time you finish the last one, the first one will probably be ready for putting some color down. So now we're going to do that thing. We're going to actually paint with some colors. So I'm going to start with a flesh color, which reminds me, you should add one flesh tone paint to your list if you're picking out a few colors to start with. You can always mix up a flesh color, but this type of color it's used so often that it's worth buying, you know, one bottle of flesh tone paint just to have and just have ready to go whenever you need it. So here I'm adding just a little bit of water to the flesh paint, and I actually probably added a little bit too much, but that's okay. We don't ever need to stress about painting miniatures. Everything is fixable. You can just remix or repaint things. It's no problem. It's like literally what paint is for, right? It's how it works. But then, you know, after you've mixed in a little water, rinse your brush again and do that little spiral thing on the paper towel to start with a clean and sharp brush tip. Now, why I'm starting with this face on this dwarf here is not because it's a face. It's because one thing that can help you out with painting a mini is the order in which you paint certain parts. Now, painting areas that are deeper or lower depth on the miniature lets you paint the raised areas or less deep details or raised details easier. Now, I was trying to think of a metaphor to make sense here, but the only one I could come up with is how we get dressed in the morning. I mean, first you have your underwear on, right? Don't be embarrassed. We all wear underwear, right? So then you put your clothes on top of the underwear, and then you put your jacket on top of your clothes, right? So paint the underwear first, and in this case, the face is the underwear. Yes, I've lost my mind. Okay, so next, using the underwear to clothes metaphor thing, I see there's a lot of chainmail on this figure that is deeper into the miniature than, say, the belts or the gloves, right? So I'm going to use this dark metallic paint from Vallejo to paint up some of the bits on this dwarf that need to be metallic. And I'll explain why I'm using this darker metal instead of silver in a little bit. Now, you can add some black to your silver paint if you want it to be darker. It's no problem. It's easy to do. But also keep in mind that when you're painting a miniature, you are free to make any choices you want. If you were painting this dwarf and you wanted him to have bright pink armor, then paint it pink. It can't nobody stop you. You're unstoppable. Let your imagination fly. Today, I'm painting my dwarf with dark metal. Not death metal, just dark metal. Now, for metallic paints, I don't typically thin these down with any water unless they're really thick, which they can be, and in those cases, I will thin them with a tick of water. But for now, this stuff's going down pretty smooth, so I'm just painting it straight on there. So I paint all the chainmail and the axes, and he's got what looks like a large breastplate on his chest and these big shoulder pauldrons. So I'm going to do those in regular silver just to add some variation so he doesn't become like this two-toned figure that might look a little boring. But I will paint his helmet in the dark metal. Okay, so now for another color, I'm going to paint up the leather stuff, and for that, I'm going to use this brand here of reddish brown paint. It's just reddish brown paint. You can ignore all these goofy names that they have or whatever. It's dark reddish brown. And you can take a regular brown and just add a little bit of red to it if you want to warm up the tone a little bit. You don't have to have a specific bottle of reddish brown. It's totally fine. And again, your mini might, have leather details, but they don't have to be brown. Your mini could have green leather or yellow leather. Or yes, if you insist, they could have pink leather. I'm just joking. Pink leather can be just as fun as black leather. Yeah, that's probably my cue to stop talking about leather right about now. So, as you may notice, the thing that makes me take a lot of time when painting is trying to kind of stay within the lines. Now, this miniature took me about 90 minutes to paint overall from start to finish. That's not counting all the breaks I took in between. You got to have your donut break, your coffee break, your YouTube break. You gotta have a lot of breaks. You're working hard, man. It's tough work painting miniatures. And anyway, most of the time that it takes is just because I am trying to color each detail bit without splashing too much of one color onto another color or into another color's area. But like I said, you can always retouch paint over mistakes, etc. So don't be stressed. And I'm gonna show you a trick later that's gonna make all the spots where two colors meet not so much of an issue. So what we're doing with this miniature now, meaning painting in each bit of detail with its own color, kind of like, it's kind of just like coloring in a coloring book at this point, right? We call this blocking in the color because we're painting the mini in blocks of color, just like in a coloring book, which I already said. You don't have to do this. This is just an easy way to start for a lot of beginners, that's all. And I still kind of paint miniatures with this same sort of pattern. And I've been painting miniatures for like 10 years. And I'm also still probably a beginner in a lot of ways. Now, sometimes you'll notice on miniatures that you can't really tell where one detail stops and another starts. Like on this dwarf, the footwear kind of blends into the pants, and I wanted to paint the pants in a different color, so I just kind of arbitrarily decided where to make the leather color stop and the pants begin. Sculpting miniatures is hard, and sometimes some of these really tiny details just get lost. It's all fine. Now, I realize I missed one of these thigh armor plate things, so I just put another drop of the dark metal paint on the palette, and I painted it up. I used the opportunity to touch up some of the dark metal detail bits where I either missed a little spot, or here where the first coat on this big flat surface of the axes got a little bit thin, and it was showing some brush strokes when it dried, right? I just put a second coat over it. Fixed. No problem. Now, something else I want you to pay attention to, or be aware of, is that some of this footage is definitely sped up, and some of it is in real time. Of course, I'd really love to show you guys the real-time footage, like at real speed, so you can see exactly how the paint is going down. But to be honest, if I didn't use a lot of sped up footage, this video would be 90 minutes long, and you're just not going to watch that. Why? Because you're busy painting your own miniatures. Duh. So just keep that in mind. The sped up footage makes it look like I'm painting a lot faster than I really am. Now, here's why I wanted to paint the little bits of pants in a different color. It just gives us another opportunity to put some bright color onto this little mini, because he's got a lot of that leather color and a lot of that dark chainmail and a lot of steel. So I just want little pops of other color. And I chose some bright blue paint, and I'm going to make the pants blue, but also this little bit of cloth sticking out from under his belt and breastplate here. And here's some Vallejo silver paint. It's super bright and shiny, and I'm going to paint the breastplate and the pauldrons with this stuff. Again, this is just to add in more variation of color and texture on the miniature. And I guess when I say texture, I mean visual texture, right, with the different colors. So now I can paint that leather belt going across his middle because it's on top of the breastplate. Now this is the best example showing why painting, from the underwear to the clothes to the jacket, or why painting deeper detail before painting the outer detail is easier. If I had painted this belt first and then tried to go in with the silver, I for sure would have gotten silver paint on the belt because I'd have to reach past it to get to the breastplate, right? So painting the lower or deeper detail first makes it easier to paint the upper or outer detail without making a bunch of mistakes that you have to go back and fix. So you're just saving a little bit of time. Now this guy has two more bits of detail we can use to introduce more colors. He's got this pouch. I decided to paint like an army green or olive green here. Again, just to bring in some more colors. And then I got out some dark blue to paint up this big mug he's got hanging off his belt. Now in the real world, this mug or beer stein would probably have been made out of wood or tin, but I'm taking my own advice. Who's to say he didn't buy a painted mug at the tavern? So you just paint things whatever color you want them to be. But yeah, I used dark blue here because I already had some blue on the model, and I'm kind of aware that there can become a point where there are too many colors on a miniature that where they'll start to clash if you've got 17 different colors. But again, that's personal preference. If you want 17 colors on your model, do it up. And here's another example of adding a little depth and dimension via color to our guy by differentiating the reddish brown I used for the leather and these wooden handles for the axes. I painted the handles in a medium brown that doesn't have as much red in it, just to try to make these two materials appear visually distinct from one another. One's wood and one's leather. Come on. Now, on almost every miniature, there's going to be at least one or two things that are the primary points of focus, or we could maybe say they're just large details that are visually dramatic. And on the dwarf here, of course, one of the major visual details is his beard, right? So I thought, let's go with a bright color here. And he could be a redhead. He could be a ginger. Gingers are badass, right? And we're in a fantasy world, and I think that this one really bright color will stand out when the mini is standing on the table a few feet away from us. Now this bright orange might look a bit crazy at first, but we're gonna do an interesting technique in a little bit that's really gonna make it look cool. It's one of these techniques I was mentioning way back at the beginning of the video, one of these tips and tricks I wanted to share. Now, I forgot to pick out this detail of the belt buckle that's on the belt, so I just did that using the very tip of the brush and tried to be very careful, and I painted a little belt buckle in that dark metal. Okay, so now we have the figure entirely blocked in, or color blocked. Now all the different parts of the miniature have color on them, so he looks very cartoony at this point, right? He's kind of flat looking. He's colorful, but flat. And there are some messy bits here and there where two colors, meet, and there might even be a few little bits of white in between the two colors where I didn't quite match everything up with paint, mostly down in the creases and the crevices where two pieces meet. But like I said, we're gonna take care of that in a second with our next step. And not only will the next step take care of all that stuff, it's also gonna add some depth and some pop to this miniature and make him look a lot cooler, basically. But right here, this is an accomplishment, right? You've technically painted a miniature at this point. So congratulations. You've painted up all the different pieces in different colors, and so they look like different materials, and you should be proud of your work. There's still some fun to be had, though. Trust me. Well, first, how about I guess I jumped the gun there a little bit. Let's paint the base because, you know, we need to paint the whole miniature to call it done. So let's put some color on the base and then we can call it done if we wanted to. This is just a dark gray that I watered down a little bit so it flows nicely off the brush. There are all kinds of things you can do with bases. You could put some miniature grass on them, which is called flock. And there are all kinds of little details you could buy from hobby manufacturers, etc. But I'll let you explore that stuff on your own. You can Google words like miniature or hobby flock, miniature basing materials, and one of my favorite things, actually probably a lot of miniature painters' favorite things, miniature tufts. That's right, T-U-F-T, plural, with an S at the end. And yeah, Google that. You'll see some very cool things that you can add to miniature bases. So now we're going to do the first of the two awesome extra steps that are both easy to do and fun to do. And at least in my opinion, they're going to level up the sort of color blocked flat miniature into the next stage of like coolness, I guess. We're going to start with this very dark brown paint. Now, I know that this paint bottle says very dark brown on it, but you can just pick any brown that you have. And if you want to make it darker, you can just add some black. You could also mix in a little bit of red or blue or yellow. You can mix red, blue, and yellow together, and they'll generally give you a brownish color, which again, you can darken with a little bit of black, or, you know, a little bit of red, or both, just to keep it warm and dark, whatever. But what we want to do right now for this guy is make a pretty dark brown wash. Now, washes are something that lots of miniature painters use, and maybe you've heard of this technique and maybe you haven't. It's really easy to do. It's very fun. I kind of like it and think it's fun because it's easy to do. And we're going to put a drop or two of the brown in the palette, and we're just going to start adding water to it. And I'm putting like big brushfuls of water into the paint and mixing it up. We're basically making a very, very thin batch of paint called a wash. We want it to be very watery, but still have a lot of color in it. There's not like a scientific ratio of paint to water because you can get different effects with different densities of paint to water. But for now, we just want something that will be pretty thin. And you can see I'm checking out the thinness of the color by dragging the wash up onto the side of the palette and seeing how it runs down the side, and I'm sort of judging the transparency that way. But really, you just want it pretty thin, and you'll see how it works, and you can always adjust on the fly because you can add more paint or add more water as you go. So now we're gonna just do my favorite type of painting, which is washing, because all you gotta do is slop the wash onto the areas you want it to be. A wash is specifically designed to slide off the upper or raised details and settle the paint color down in the recesses, in the little nooks and crannies. Now I'm putting the wash on this guy's beard to add depth and shadows to all the little nooks and crannies. That's what I said, right? But anyway, now the wash will tint the raised areas a little bit, but we're not too worried about that. It's going to be okay, and the second magic fun step is going to deal with all that anyway. Now, I even put this wash onto the dwarf's face to get some shadows into the eye sockets and under his cheeks and nose and stuff. And washes will fill in all those little areas where we had two colors meeting together, right? Now, I want to wash all the leather bits, but I think the wash color needs to be darker because the leather is so dark, right? In comparison to the guy's beard, it's much darker. So I'll just add some black to the wash in the palette and mix that up. And then I just go to town putting that wash on all the leather bits. It's super easy. Super fun. I'm so lazy that I even put it on the green pouch. Maybe I should have made a greenish brown wash just for that little detail bit, but you know, it's gonna be okay. I put the wash on the boots and the belts and the gloves and just all the leather bits, right? Now, using a little bit of the leftover dark blue paint that was almost dried up on my palette, I just made it into a dark blue wash by thinning that with water, and again, I put that on all the blue material bits on the Mini. Again, the purpose of washes are to deposit darker shades of colors into the recesses of the model. So we're shading the model with washes. Now, to darken up the silver paint, I wanted to make just a straight black wash for that, because this is all about the color that you're applying, right? The tint that you're applying. So back to the water cup I go, and I mix up a black wash, and there we go, adding some depth and shadow to the bright silver parts. I went ahead and put it on the dark metal bits too, just because I kind of got brush crazy, and it's so easy to paint with washes, I just kept going. I told you it was fun. I even put it onto the base. It'll make the little recesses and the rocks and stuff a bit darker, and that's perfect. Now we're adding a little bit of definition. We're upping the contrast between the lighter and darker areas on the model, and you can already see that it's making a difference on the flat color blocking that we had before. Now, when you're all done with the washes, let those washes dry on the miniature for, I don't know, 15 to 20 minutes, 25 minutes. It all depends on how much wash you put on the miniature and how big it is and all that stuff. But you want all that water to evaporate before you go into the next step. And that is kind of important for this next step. But once the miniature is dry, we're now ready to do the last and what I think is the most eye-catching step that's going to make this model pop. And that is what we call highlighting, which just means we're going to go back over the model with some brighter colored versions of all the colors we already used. And we're not going to spend a lot of time on this. We're just going to add little pops of brighter color to all the raised areas that we feel like. So I got a little bit of bright orange, but you could just mix a little yellow into your orange to make it brighter. And we're just going to hit the raised areas and the edges of the beard. And that's what we're going to do for this entire highlighting pass. We're just going to paint the raised details and edges of things with either brighter colors or even just the base colors that we used before the washes were put on them. Because now those base colors will be brighter because they don't have the wash on it to begin with. Now, this is very easy to do. It's not as easy as the wash step, maybe, but it's pretty easy, and it also just makes the model really start to pop right before your eyes, and that is fun to see. And you can totally see how we're going from that flat, cartoony, coloring book sort of look to now this sort of more detailed and contrasty paint job, right? I mean, it's looking pretty cool, right? I just mixed some of the flesh tone paint in with the reddish brown paint to highlight all of the leather spots like the belts and the gloves and the boots. And again, we're just going over with the fine pointed brush with a little bit of paint on it, and we're picking out the raised areas like the knuckles and the fingers and the edges of the belt and things like that. And we're just adding these little highlights wherever we want. I mean, technically we're kind of adding highlights where natural light would fall on the miniature, but you know, you put the highlights where you want them. Highlights and recess shading from the washes add depth and definition to each of these details on our miniatures. Now, I went back in with the regular flesh color to pick out the raised areas of the dwarf's face, which is basically just his nose and his cheekbone here, right? Because there's not much of his face peeking out from his beard, but just using the color, like I said, that we already had, that base flesh tone, and putting that on top of the flesh tone with the wash on it, it still comes out like little brighter pops of color, which make the details pop. And this is why I use the dark metallic on a lot of the metal on this figure, specifically so that I could use the silver to come back and highlight it all in this phase. I'm just using the bright silver to highlight the helmet by hitting some of the edges of the details on the helmet and also the top of the helmet itself. I'm just like dotting and dabbing with the silver to make it bright because that's the top of his head where sunlight or whatever light might be hitting him the most. And then I dabbed a bit at the chainmail to make that stuff pop. And I'm putting some highlights on the middle of the pauldrons at the highest spots. And it doesn't really matter that I might be putting it on a lot here and there because armor can get all beat up, right? Armor gets beaten up. So if there's some splotching to his armor, it'll just look more realistic. It'll just look more banged up and stuff, right? And it's just fun to do. And you don't have to worry too much. So, you know, don't stress. Just have fun and try not to get the different colors onto other colors. That's the trickiest part, I guess, but just take your time. I did the edges of the dark metal stuff like these little thigh plates or whatever these are. And again, I just started putting some dots and dabs of the silver onto the middle of the dark metal, but I didn't cover it all. I left some of the dark metal in some areas. So it looks like these metal plates have some dents and some dings in them. And again, it's just adding some definition and some variation into that very flat base coat color. The sort of the color blocking that we had before. I put some edges on the axe blades with the bright silver to make those pop and look sharp and shiny, and those are pretty cool. This is great. And again, this step did not take very long. I only spent probably 10 minutes doing this. I'm going over the little pouch here with a brighter olive green that I had in another bottle, but you could take the original color again and just add a little bit of yellow to make it brighter, and that would make it a perfect highlighting color too. Now, when you see the mini from farther away, because of how tiny he is, these dramatic highlights are going to look pretty cool. Now, same thing with the blue cup, which I painted in the dark blue. So I just take the light blue that I already had, and I add a little bit of the dark blue too, to make it not quite as bright. And I just sort of paint the edges of the mug But I also kind of do a little bit of what we might call layering, where I paint more of the bottom of the mug and the walls of the mug with a little bit of this light blue, and I make sure to get the very edges of the top and the bottom hit with the brightest blue itself. And now we can take some medium gray, basically a lighter gray than the dark gray that we put on the base, and highlight up some of the rocks on the base. And for sure here you can see what the highlighting is doing, right? Again, this step is it's just quick and easy and very fun. Now, I'm going to do a third step here that I didn't mention, and you don't have to do this step, but this is just a little tiny bit of extra highlight, icing, where I took some of the flesh tone that's super bright in comparison to that red leather color, that reddish brown, and I'm just dotting it directly on and dragging it on the very edges and tippy tops of some of the details on the leather. I don't do it everywhere, just little tiny spots to make those spots even more dramatic in contrast to the other colors. I even use the skin tone to highlight the little wooden handles on the axes that were painted in that more medium brown because I forgot to hit those earlier. And again, I spent about a minute doing those little bits of super highlighting. And there's our little dwarf all painted up. Now you might be a lot faster than me, or you might take a little bit longer than me, and that's all fine. It doesn't really matter, right? All that matters is that you like what you're doing, and you like the miniature, and that you're having fun. And if you find that you really enjoy painting miniatures, there's a whole world of stuff out there on YouTube and stuff to learn about and to check out that are related to this hobby. That's not even mentioning all the tabletop games you can play with miniatures. But yeah, there are all kinds of other techniques and painting styles and all sorts of miniature manufacturers and paints and all kinds of stuff to get into and cool stuff that you can learn about and really expand your dive into this really cool miniature painting hobby. So here's to hoping you had some fun and that you want to paint more minis. And if you do it. Get your paint on. I'll see ya.